Hi everyone. I thought I'd do one more traditional watercolor, but this time I will do the cottonwood leaves that are up in the upper right hand corner. This is the exact same painting I did for the Rebelle 5 Pro getting started. Now what I'll do this time though is link the two, but then also do this one in traditional. Now the only thing I did different was make the leaves a little wee bit bigger, just so we could really see what's going on with the traditional painting and how many different layers of paint I could put down, and then maybe go back over some of the veins and touch them up with some gesso white again. And again, I could even mix a little bit of color to that if I want to make it more of a tannish or orangish or whatever the case may be. Now, this particular drawing, it's very light. I kept it very light because this is going to be a very light painting, but also if it looks traced, that's because it was. And the reason why is some of my more elaborate drawings, I thought I'd do it this time just to show you, but more elaborate drawings, especially like birds with individual feathers or that are in flight or any of the more complicated subjects like that, what I will do is draw them out on tracing paper first, and then I have my original drawing. That way, if I mess up this watercolor, and I will be the first to admit that I do mess up watercolors, what I could then do is then just take my graphite paper, and it's just in a roll, and all I have to do is lay this down, face down, and take this over top of it, and then retrace right over it, and I'll have a new drawing ready to start on a new sheet of paper. So this way I could pick up right where I left off and have to start over again. But anytime you have to start over again, don't ever look at it as a mistake. It's the opportunity to learn something, and just think of it as you'll know better now when you create the exact same painting, that it'll be even hopefully that much better. But also with tracing paper, just say for example, if I have a drawn out background and this was a subject, this also gives me the opportunity to move around my subject on my drawn out background to see where I exactly want to place my actual subject. The reason why is if it is a bird in flight or sitting or whatever, I would never personally want to just start drawing out a subject on my drawn out background without knowing how the tails or wings or anything else are going to interact with other things on the painting. So in other words, if I have a tail might go right into the edge of a branch or something that's already on the drawing, if I start drawing it out this way, I can move it around and make sure that doesn't happen. That is called a tangent, and that is nothing more than when two different shapes share a same line, it kind of tends to flatten them out together. And that's not something you may want in your drawing. They are pretty tough to work with, but sometimes they're easy to miss in a drawing as far as when you first draw it out. You can at least give yourself a chance to move around the picture when it's on tracing paper and just have the best understanding of where you would want to place that subject. That once you get it where you want it, then slip the graphite paper underneath it and then just trace it out right where it's at. Let's get started. Okay, I darkened up my lines a little bit and we're ready to go here. And what I'm going to do is give some real subtle washes here. I was going to wash over the whole entire thing, but I think there's too many whites in this particular leaf that I might just work around these later just for the sand and then cover them over with the tracing paper and then splatter that later. But I think what I'm going to do here is just put in some real subtle washes on this one, but I'm going to try and leave as much white behind as I can and more or less paint around it. So what I'm going to do is more or less, I got some paint mixed up here and I want to just take a little wee bit at a time. I'm going to put it down super light because I want to leave the whites to begin with. And then I have to have it a fairly dry brush and leave some of the white. And this leaf is going to be real light. Even though it's going down a little bit darker than the white paper around it, I'll probably end up making the sand a little wee bit darker just to make this leaf look lighter. And I'm barely mixing any paint with this at all. And then I got to daub it pretty good just so I get just a little wee bit of paint and water so I could skim over it and leave as much white behind as I can. But while it's a little wee bit wet, now's the time to put a little wee bit of darker colors in it. Let them soft blend. And that next leaf right beside it is going to be real dark, so I could straighten that edge up. And then just about straight cobalt, because I like to do optical mixes actually. And that's just one color over another, but they have an optical mix to them. And I think the pure color sometimes really is an eye grabber for any type of watercolor. Okay, that's all I'm going to do with that one. And then maybe I'll put a little wee bit, while that's wet, a little wee bit of quinacridone gold, real light. That's too dark. And it'll stop at my dry spots, just like digital. Especially because it's on an angle now too. And then this leaf is real dark too, so I don't have to worry about accidentally getting any over. Now this might be dry enough to take a second coat over it. Yeah, it looks like it. Just to give it a little bit more texture and complexity. But I don't want to lose my white. I'll leave that go because then I'll do this a little wee bit darker right through here, but I want to make sure it's completely dry. If not, it'll just keep on blending in and I'll just get a darker and darker gob instead of texture like this right here. We'll leave that dry, but then we could work on something else here. We could start the orange. I'm going to put oranges down on this one real light. And I'll tone down that orange. That's Windsor orange, which is pretty deep for an orange. So I'm going to mix a little bit of lemon yellow in with it. And then this will even go to the golds and browns too, so I don't have to worry about making anything too dark here. This one will be reasonably darker. And I'm going to save my white right in here, right in there. There's a pretty good patch of white. I'll add a little wee bit more water to it. And with my orange, just to get some soft areas here and there. Let it blend and bleed a little bit. I'm still trying to save my white spots. Certain areas are too white. I could always go back in and give them another wash over it once it's dry, but I definitely can't put the white back unless I go opaque. Okay, that's that one. And then this is going to be pretty much the same as this over here. And then this little tab right here, this little tip is going to be real dark, so we don't have to worry about that. Anything that goes pretty dark, we don't have to worry about right now because that's going to be darker than any color we have down now. And then once I add more and more texture to this, and then right around where the veins are, that's going to really pull these leaves alive, so to speak. Now what I can do, I'm going to put a lot of cobalt violet right in this area, right in here. And then these are all shadows here. This leaf down in here. Let's see. That's that leaf here. I missed a drawing. I'm going to have to, let me see where that's at. I'm going to draw that in now. Goes from down here. And we'll put that leaf in there too. And that's the stem for that one. That's this one curled up. Now let's put a little oranges over here in this one. And again, I'm just putting down very little bit of paint at a time. This tab is pretty light here, so I'm going to paint around it. I'm going to make the shadow area just a little bit darker. That's actually this line here. Right there. And then this one goes up through here. The old kneaded eraser. Works pretty good. Okay, we're going to give that some cobalt. I don't have a real pointy brush here either, only because I have to watch my shapes. I don't want real pointy lines. I dried off the brush a little bit there just so I can soak up some of the water. And when it starts to dry out, I can really start doing some dry brush again and skip over the paper. And I'm going to put some of this cobalt violet down here just to have a glow underneath the shadow area. I'm going to try and leave some of that cobalt violet behind once I start shadowing it. And we're going to go with the oranges and burnt siennas on this one. I'm going to try and leave some white behind. Okay, I'm going to go back and finish that up a little bit, and we'll leave it dry. And then this leaf right here is going to go a lot darker, but I'll take it down in stages, but keep on dry brushing it, just so I keep on getting textures like this right in here. But here I don't have to leave too much white paper, just where the sunlight is kind of gliding right across the edge of that right in here. But then here, this is an all direct sun, so I'm trying to keep as much white as I can. Then when I start putting in the veins, then I'll shadow around the veins, and hopefully that's when the leaves will start to come alive. Let's let this dry for a while. Okay, I'll run through this real quick for you. I got my X-Acto knife with a number 11 blade, and I just put another piece of tracing paper down, traced over just a very outside edge of all of the leaves, and then that's what, when I cut this out on the pencil line, one will be the stencil for just the leaves, and the other one will be a cover to protect the leaves when I do the sand. And I'll just run through this real quick, speed cutting, so to speak. But then now, what I'm going to start doing is obviously just finish the leaves. But then what I want to do is start mixing the colors. I don't want to keep on putting the exact same colors over the leaves, what I have down now, or it'll just keep on building up. And if you put, in other words, a yellow over a yellow, it's not going to be that dramatic. So what I might do now is just real subtle blues, cobalt violets, maybe some burnt siennas as I go darker, but I just want to mix up the colors a little bit. But now just remember, this is just how I'm doing it. So you do it how you need to do it depending on what your situation is. But this will give you a rough idea what something might look traditionally versus the version I already have digitally. Okay, we're going to take out the same brush, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of cobalt violet, and I might even go a little bit of cobalt turquoise for that top leaf. And again, I'm just going to put down a little wee bit at a time, and I'm daubing it. And I will have, in fact, I won't even have an eraser ready, just in case it goes too dark too quick. And this will hopefully provide my complexity of the leaves themselves, and then I can actually go a little bit darker. But this color right here looks like it'd be a real good color for where the areas of the leaf are already dead and dried out and look almost a little bit translucent. And I'm just glancing back over at my reference here on the monitor. That's the same picture you see up in the upper right hand corner. That's already too wet, so I'm going to let that dry. And we're going to go back over here and go down into here. I'm going to go back to now my quinacridone golds and burnt siennas. And I'm just going to build this up a little bit at a time. And the tip of this is still going to be, the tip of this leaf right in here is still going to be quite a bit darker. So I don't have to worry about that. And that won't even actually hurt. In fact, I actually like that better. We're going to put a little wee bit more in. There's a happy accident. And as the paint runs out, I could then even give it more and more texture. This is going to be somewhat dark in here, so I could do that separately. There's a pretty strong color value change in any one of these places, then I could treat it as a separate section. There we go. Now we're going to go to this one. We'll get a little bit more. I'll go with the burnt siennas here too. Quinacridone gold. I'll move my brush over here. There we go. Now we're going to use this every now and then. I'm trying to barely touch it. I'm going to get a little wee bit of blue in this one. Right in here. And then remember, once I'm done, I could go back with my kneaded eraser and pull out the pencil line. So that's not a crisis at this point either. I'm going to leave a little wee bit of orange right in here, lighter values. Once I start setting my values, then I can easily go back over both sides and darken up both of them, whether I'll be darkening this one up and that up. And that will help. Right now I'm just trying to really just skim over, leave myself a little bit of natural texture with all the dry brush I'm doing. Right in here is a good bit too. Grab a little wee bit more. I'm going to pat that just a little bit. Now this one's going to go pretty dark right in here. I'll start with the oranges. Maybe even just go straight to the golds and the burnt sienna. But I would like to take this down just a little bit at a time to just keep on building up textures like this one right here. The overlapping layers really adds easy complexity for all that I'm doing. So just remember that all I'm doing is just skimming over certain areas, but it's still starting to add the texture that I'd be looking for. I'll go a little bit darker in some of these places. Mix up the colors. And this whole painting is going to be pretty much a lot of dry brush. That is the texture I'm looking for. And even in the shadowed areas, I'll still try and have some of that texture And also with this type of particular sand and what have you, what I want to do is I think I'll probably actually splatter the sand first and then go back over it with my shadowed areas of the leaves, because I'd rather have the sand down first and the sand texture, then take my bluish grays back over where the shadowed areas would be. Then I'll be toning down that same sand texture. In other words, I wouldn't want to put my shadows in first. Then if I splatter my sand over top of it, I'd have to go back over the shadows anyway, because then my splatters, especially if I start using some lighter colors, some opaque lighter colors, they'll be pure white in the shadowed areas, the same value as in the open sunlight areas, and I wouldn't want that. That wouldn't make it look like that particular patch of sand was actually in a shadowed area. Now we're going to get raw sienna. Again, I think I want to take it down just a little bit at a time. And then I'll wait till this completely dries to put the shadows on the leaves also. Because then once I put the shadows on, whatever texture I have on the leaves, that same texture will come through the shadowed areas, instead of making it look like it's just a patch of bluish gray floating above everything else. And a little bit darker up in here. I'm going to blend that down a little bit, I think. This is just a wet brush. I'm just going to destroy just some of those edges, just a little bit. Feathered in what's already there. Okay, I'm going to leave that dry. Then as I keep on darkening up this area in here, it'll really pronounce this leaf here. And then this has to go way darker in here. This one has to go just a little wee bit darker, like right in here maybe, just to give it some form. Then I could start putting in some of the veins. And what I might do is put in a dark line first, and then a whiter line right beside it. Make it look like the vein is shadowed and highlighted at the same time. Let's let this dry. Okay, we dried it off a little bit. I'm going to go back into this leaf first. Take the same brush. We're just going to mix a little bit of burnt sienna again. And there's a couple of different patches here. This is real dark over here, but I'll still start a little bit of a texture here and there, just so it carries through the shadowed areas. There's a vein in here. And some of the areas of these leaves really have some of that strong cobalt violet in it. Makes it look dead, dried out. And some down here. Lighten up the top of that just a little bit. Now that the brush is drying out, I'm starting to get some real hard textures there, which is fine. And then also keep in mind, most watercolor artists, when they use their watercolors, the way they're set up, in most cases, you're really just either looking for a cool color or a warm color, and that's it. We'll start the shadowed area. Okay, we'll leave that dry good and keep going with the texture. This is going to be real dark in here. I could go ahead and put that dark in actually. That's going to be more towards, I'm going to mix up a cobalt violet, a little bit of this burnt sienna and then a little wee bit of cobalt blue. And I'll start my shadow color. And it has to go a good bit darker than this, but I just want to draw it into where I want to go. If I keep it light, I'll be able to change things or control it a little bit easier. I'm just more or less drawing it in right now. But I want to get some of them highlights in there as the sun is skimming right across the edge of the leaf, really showing the texture off. Okay, here's that same color over here. Okay, we'll let that dry. Okay, now I'm going to start making this one a little wee bit darker, and then also start going with my shapes now. I have an established texture, but now I'm going to just try and start making some sense of the texture. Now, with that strong texture there and the strong contrast between the layers I put down, that would survive a couple of coats of paint over everything. So in other words, if I start making some areas darker, I'll still have subtle textures there and subtle color differences, but I'll be able to even them up a little bit, but then also take certain areas down shadow-wise completely. Like up in here, then I'm going to make some of these areas a little wee bit darker, just right in here, just to make it a little bit more of a wave there. And some of this already is just about done because it's so light. I really can't do too much more to it. I'll make this a little wee bit in here darker. Eraser handy. And then I'm just going to touch it here and there, just to lift some of that off. I'm going to take a little wee bit of burnt sienna down. As long as I have my wet edge there, all the paint will stop right at that edge. There we go. Very subtle. And then when I start putting some of the white veins back over that, the dark veins, you might not be able to see them on the small picture, but I could see a lot more on a 24-inch monitor again. I'm going to put a little wee bit of this right through here. I'm going to go back to that cobalt violet. Again, I'm trying to establish a texture as I go. Quickly glancing over to my reference every now and then, just so the leaf comes together as I would like it to. And I think even once I start putting in some of the veins here and there, I could go back in and even shadow even just a little bit more of the low spots, or where it would be shadowed from the angled leaves themselves, where they bend and curl from the veins themselves. Like this one over here, this side of the leaf is a good bit darker. I'm going to go back to the burnt sienna a little bit. And there's a glow underneath the bottom. I'm going to try and leave it there. Trying to keep my head out of the way might not always work. There's a nice glow on this one too. I'll make this area right in here a good bit darker, but then I'll leave the glow down here from the reflection of the light coming up off the sand underneath. And then once I get all my textures fairly where I'm happy with them and the shading, then I'll go ahead and spot the leaves also. Okay, we'll leave that dry. I think we're getting there. Okay, we're going to get a little bit more done on this. I'm going to make these areas in here darker. Oranges and burnt siennas. This area has to go a lot darker. And then the shadowed part, I'm going to go real deep. And then some of these areas down in here, I'll just slowly take it darker. And I obviously have to make this area darker too. Well, let's get started here. Okay, let's let some of that dry. And we'll go back to it, make some of our areas darker. We're getting to the point where we'll be able to mask off the leaves and start our sand and then go back into the shadows. Okay, what I'm going to do next is just to try and put a real light coat of golds and yellows in the background just to start my sand. And then I'll go back in with white spots and darkish, real deep gray spots back and forth on top of those yellows just to get my highlights of the white sand and the blacks, and even a little bit of burnt siennas in there too. But I want to give just a coat of everything, and I'm going to just try and work it in, and we're going to paint right around it. So let's try this here. And it's definitely going to be done fast if I'm going to do it this way. I'll go over that leaf. I'll get him later. And I don't care if it kind of like just blends out here and there. It'll be kind of like more of a vignette. And if my head gets in the way, it's because sometimes I can't see. There's a sheen on the water. Can't see where I started and stopped. Okay, that's not too bad. And now that it's wet, I'll take a little wee bit more color. I'll leave it drip here and there. Do its watercolor thing. A darker streak right up in here. And I'm trying to look to see where the paper's still wet enough that I could put some color back into it to leave it bleed. Let's put a little wee bit of cobalt blue and violet where the shadowed areas are. Then I'm going to go back over those stems with some white, and I think we should try our tech pens and just to do some line work with them. Okay, we'll let that go like it is. I want to leave this dry really good before I start spotting it, because it's a real coarse, sharp colored edged sand, so to speak. Then when I start splatting it down, I want those drops to be real sharp. It would be completely the opposite of what I did with the snowfall, where I left the snow blend into a wet background and diffuse and soften them a little bit. This will be a little bit different. Okay, let's let that dry good, and we're going to cover up the leaves and just start splattering it, because I want to get my actual just values for the sand and everything else to make sure I could go a little wee bit darker for the leaves, or I may have to stop and just start putting in some detail here and there. And to a certain extent, some of the areas I can actually go back in with a thirsty wet brush and lift some of the color back out, but sometimes that makes it look a little bit muddy. Let's let that dry good. Okay, I got my tracing paper stencil down, just the opposite of what I cut out. Now later on I'll put the opposite side on and then just splot the leaves. But if you look at the leaves, those spots are kind of bled in a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll slightly mist the leaves down and I'll get a soft spot there. but I want real hard, coarse spots here. What I'm trying to do now is duplicate the digital version I did. And when I was doing the digital version, I was trying to duplicate traditional painting. So for that reason, we're going to try and just start off. And I am going to start off with some different values of grays. Get a little bit of brown matter, and I could go light and dark. I could build it up. I'll still see my yellow, I'm sure. And I like this brush for making spots. This is probably about the finest spots I can make. Hopefully our tracing paper is doing its job. As it dries out, hopefully the brush itself, the drops will get even a little bit smaller. I'm going to mix some gold in there. I could lift this out. Didn't make my stencil the right size, but that should be okay. Now I'll just grab some of this yellow and gold. That looks like a good color there. And once I put the white back over everything, again, we got to remember these drops are going to lighten up a little bit as they go. I'll just even leave the drops on the outer edges, just to give a hint out on white paper. Now we're going to go with the gesso. That's it right here. I'm going to take some out, put it in my plate again. I can make different variations of whites too. I have to go more opaque. We'll start with this. You can see it on the tracing paper. If it's very subtle, okay, let's go one more time with some darks. Okay, I'm going to put the dryer to that. Okay, I'm going to mix up some real opaque white. That might be it for the dots. Okay, let's let that dry. Okay, it's definitely not going to be as perfect circles as digital. It's definitely going to be more random, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and peel this off and see what we got. Just take it off real slow. Okay, there's our sand pattern. Now we can go back in and finish the leaves. Okay, it's all dry. If our spots are too dark, we'll have one of two choices pretty much. Either take some white or even some gold spots back over them, because I can mix the gesso with a color. And then also I could spray it down and let the water set for a while and then try and lift up some of the darker paints. Now the opaque whites, they'll set just like in acrylic paint. You won't be able to lift that up, but we will be able to lift up some of the darker spots. But I think I might even put some maybe gold spots back in later. But as long as I have my patterns, I could do that. But right now we're just going to finish up the leaves and go back in, finish our shadows, paint around our stems a little bit. And then I might even go back in with the drawing pen and some white gesso, put in the veins. We're going to completely finish this up, and then we'll stop after we're done. Okay, right now I'm just actually blocking in some of my shadowed areas of the rest of the leaves. This will help me define my shadowed spaces, but I don't want to build them up all at once. I don't want to cover up that texture that I've already created with the burnt siennas and the oranges. This will give me a chance of leave more and more shadowed areas behind and not paint them at all. And then it'll also give me a chance to gradate my shadows depending on how intense the shadowed area really is. Now what I'll do is actually block out the leaves themselves, spray them with clear water, and then splatter them with drops. But because the leaves are already wet, then what I will actually be able to do is let them blend in and soften a little bit, unlike the sand. Putting in my highlights with the gesso, This will give me a chance to define those real small highlighted areas that would be very difficult to paint around. Using my drawing pen to sketch in some of the shadowed areas of the veins, the sketchy look really lends itself well to dead leaves and forest vegetation such as this. Blocking in my final shadows, making them as dark as they need to go. We'll wrap this up and see what we have. Okay, I think that's it. We'll leave this one just right where it's at, because the most important thing I want to do with this one is now we're going to put it side by side with the digital version, and it will just be painting from start to finish of the traditional watercolor and the digital watercolor side by side, and then we'll wrap things up at the end. While these two demos are playing side by side, we could go over some of the similarities and differences of each. Now, with the digital, you have a much larger initial investment, whether it be PC, Mac, a tablet, a monitor, and not to mention the software you may need just to get started. But after that initial investment, you could draw and paint indefinitely without the purchase of brushes, paints, and paper. Now with traditional, that would be all you need. Just the paints, papers, and brushes to get started, but you will constantly need to replenish those resources. Not to mention when you first start out, that may be when you're using the most of those resources just to avoid mistakes. Let's move on to difficulty. Now with traditional painting, it's my opinion that traditional painting is far more difficult than digital. With traditional, there's very little room for errors, especially watercolors. Now I've always looked as oil paints and acrylics the digital of traditional painting. And the reason why I say that is because you could keep painting until you get the end result you want. You're working with opaque paints. Watercolors is a little bit different. If you want to stick with working from light to dark with no return, then that would become a true transparent watercolor. Some societies do allow for touch-ups of whites and what have you, but otherwise they may consider it a mixed media if you use too much light colors back over dark. Digital, on the other hand, is endless amount of options. Working with individual layers, undos, masks, different types of tools, including such as a stamper that will allow you to redo or readjust anything you've done or made a mistake. Something as simple as a lock transparency would be well worth the time in traditional painting. This gives you the opportunity to work with very specific areas with very little effort. So depending on how much of a challenge you want may determine which one you go with. Now, which one would I go with? Well, I think that would depend on the end result that I want. If I want a nice painting, framed, matted, hanging in the gallery, I think I would opt to choose traditional painting. If I want something ready for a website, for the web, digital printing, then I would definitely opt for the digital. That depends on what I want as an end result. Using both of them and have the option of using both of them would obviously be the best way to go. But if I would have to choose, then it may depend on how serious you want to get and how much money you have as an initial investment. I feel the best artists I've seen out there came from a traditional background. And with that in mind, it may be an idea to just start out small and light and inexpensive and to see how far your abilities take you. With digital, there is no replenishing of materials, but it is an expensive investment. Good luck with all of your art endeavors, whichever one you choose, or both. And as I always said in the past, until I see you out in the field or back at the studio, thanks for watching and goodbye for now.